Once, long ago, in the magical land down under, the Australian government had a domestic aircraft industry. The Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation began in 1936 when Essington Lewis visited Europe and thought that things were getting just a little too spicy with Nazi Germany, coming to the conclusion that war was not only possible, but probable. Concerned by Australia's lack of industry and ability for British-supplied airframes to reach the land down under in wartime, he lobbied the Australian government to form a domestic aircraft industry for the purpose of providing Australia's Air Force with the ability for local aircraft production. After setting up tooling shops and engine production, the CAC began searching for an advanced flight trainer to be their first domestic aircraft. Figuring it was easier to build something under license than from scratch, they shopped around both the USA and Britain before settling on the North American NA-16. The NA-16 was a good choice. It was fairly easy to build, as was its engine, and both licenses were acquired from North American and Pratt & Whitney by 1937. But there were concerns, as while it was being used as a trainer, there was also some serious consideration to use it as a fighter bomber, which drew some nervous expressions from the Royal Australian Air Force's more senior staff since its performance didn't really line up with contemporary aircraft. But CAC had an idea: make the NA-16 a hot rod. And so, the Wirraway was born, named so after an Aboriginal word meaning roughly to challenge. Compared to the NA-16, the Wirraway would be given an extra gun in the nose and a flexible tail gunner in the rear. The tail was also modified to better accommodate dive bombing, and the provisions for bombs were also added. It still wasn't much faster, and indeed in a proper dogfight the Wirraway would be outperformed by any real modern fighter, but it was easy to build and provided experience for the CAC's industry to expand and grow. In fact, it soon became apparent that they could make more airframes than they had engines available, and struck a deal with Britain, who took on some of the Wirraways from Australia. When war broke out and Australia was busy fighting the Japanese, the Wirraway was soon in large use by the RAAF as a trainer and light bomber, though its actions as the latter role were sparse and rare. As a trainer, though, it was excellent, with very forgiving and stable flight characteristics and ease of handling both on ground and in the air. As the war was heating up for Australia, however, and they were beginning to notice that Essington's concerns about Britain supplying airframes to Australia were very apt, they decided to seek out production of a domestic, purpose-built fighter to defend the continent should Japan invade, which was a legitimate concern as the Northern Territories were coming under air attack and many saw it as a prelude to an amphibious invasion. Not wanting to start from scratch, they revised and redesigned the Wirraway into a purpose-built fighter, giving it a stronger engine and heavier armaments to create the Boomerang, though by the time it arrived it would only end up being used as an Army cooperation aircraft to provide close air support. The Wirraway, meanwhile, would surprisingly accomplish some daring deeds for an advanced trainer. As though the fears of its underperformance as a fighter were not ill-founded, Australian pilots saw it more as a challenge than a hindrance, and used it as a fighter regardless, with one pilot officer, Archer, managing to down a Ki-43 Hayabusa in the thing. After about the midpoint of the war, and Japan being put on the back foot and slowly driven out of the Pacific by the US and Commonwealth forces, the Wirraway would be replaced in frontline duty by P-40s and later P-51s, relegating it to its original role as a trainer, where it performed till 1959. 755 Wirraways would be produced, which is not an insignificant number for the CAC's first aircraft, especially for a nation that up until the Wirraway lacked a dedicated aircraft industry entirely. Post-war, even with production having stopped, the Wirraways would be found in Royal Australian Air Force and Citizen Air Force of Australia till more modern trainers were available, and despite several hundreds being scrapped post-war as surplus, many were preserved and several even still fly today. In the end, Wirraways would outlast CAC and many of CAC's other aircraft, which is a feat in of itself and only makes it more impressive as, again, it was Australia's first aircraft they built domestically. They went from knowing absolutely nothing about aircraft manufacturing to creating a masterpiece that survives and flies to this day in the hands of collectors. For a little trainer made from a North American licensed product, that's pretty damn impressive.